As I prayed about this very first episode of Building God's Army, my heart is filled with encouragement from the response that we've gotten from people wanting to join God's army. It's about building a spiritual army of the remnant of Jesus Christ to stand up in adversity to the trials of the world, more specifically the end times. Now, as I prepared for this, I was so amazed at the response. Fellow warriors, there are hundreds and hundreds, if not at least 1,000 people who have declared they're in the spiritual army of God. That is great news, because as I prepared for this, as I prayed about what's these first steps look like, God brought me to the book of Nehemiah. Now, Nehemiah was a prophet who returned to Israel to help build the wall of Jerusalem, and then eventually they rebuilt the temple of God. And he did it in the face of adversity. Nehemiah was the group that had to build with one hand and have a sword in the other. They fought as they built, and there is no doubt that that's exactly what this is going to look like. The enemy is not going to be okay with the remnant of Jesus Christ standing up and preparing themselves for battle against him. He's not going to be okay with this. So we have to be prepared. So as I dug through the book of Nehemiah, it's an incredible book. You know, what we see in Nehemiah is we see a people rise up in agreement. This needs to be done. We all agree. And immediately they were faced with adversity. And we're at that point now. A group of people are rising up saying, we all agree. Now what? This is a critical piece. I found it fascinating, and I kind of at first wondered, why, God, are you bringing me to Nehemiah? But it was really because this is a remnant. This is an example of a remnant of God who, when the rest of the world is busy doing other things, there's a small group of people specifically working for God. That's where the term remnant comes from, is groups like Nehemiah. And the most fascinating thing is, as I dug through this in chapter 2, right after everybody agreed, all right, we have to do this. Now what? It says in verse 3, at the end of chapter 2, right at verse 3, it says, "Then Eliashib, the high priest, rose up with his brethren, the priests, and built the sheep gate." I find that fascinating, that the very first thing to get built was the sheep gate. So here's a group of people, the remnant of God. They all agree this has to be done. God has asked us to do it. We're going to be obedient to do it. Let's do it. The very first thing that happens is the high priest builds the sheep gate. I find that fascinating because for me, this is all about being the separation of the sheep and the goats. The fact that the very first thing they did was built a sanctuary, a way for the sheep to get in and out, was fascinating to me. It's the very first thing they built on the wall was the sheep gate, and it was built by the high priest. So, you know, it's very important that we take a time to understand, well, what is the difference between a sheep and a goat? You know, I want to kind of remind you, and hopefully many of you have thought this thought too, and I've mentioned it in videos, is that when Jesus was here and he was walking amongst us, and you could, if you were alive in that time, you could literally reach out and touch him. You could see him, and you could reach out and touch him, and you could talk to him, and you could watch him perform miracles. And he fulfilled hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of prophecies just by walking around. And people didn't see it. They didn't see it. They were staring God in the eyes, and they totally missed it. They were warned by several prophets that this was going to happen, and they stared it in the face, and they totally missed it. That's exactly what the end times is going to look like. Most people are going to be waiting for some sort of Hollywoodized grand event that they can then point at and say, there it is. Now we know, just now rapture us up, God. That's not how it's going to play out at all. There's a high likelihood that most of America and most of the world will be staring at the end of the age in the face, and they will totally miss it. And the day that the trumpet blasts and Jesus Christ returns, they will be mourning, because they will be wondering, well, how did we miss this? How in the world did we miss this? And then Jesus will then shepherd the people, and he'll separate them from the sheeps and the goats. You know, and it's interesting, when the night that Jesus was captured, within that 24-hour period of time, dozens and dozens of prophecies were fulfilled within a 24-hour period of time. And even the disciples who were with him, they didn't see it. You know, an interesting thing is that when Jesus was praying to God, he knew what was about to happen, and he told the disciples what was about to happen. But they still didn't catch it, because while he was concerned about being nailed to a cross, they were sleeping. And his response to them is, "Can't you sit with me for 1 hour?" Now, I bring that up because as we talk about the differences between the sheep and the goats, this is something we all need to meditate on and pray about personally. Are we a sheep? Are we a goat? Now, let's just start with, we all deserve to be goats. Let's all start with that. A lot of messages people sent me were that they were afraid they were goats. I'm afraid I'm a goat too, by the way. We're all goats. We all deserve to be goats. But there's some things that we can do that when Jesus Christ comes back, he looks at us and he shepherds us over to greener pastures through the sheep gate. And that's what I want to be a part of. Can't we meditate and pray on this for an hour? So what I want to do on this first episode, because it's like spiritual boot camp. We're building a spiritual army of the remnant of Jesus Christ for God. It takes work. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to build the sheep gate. How do we build a sheep gate? We have to make a way for the sheep to get in and out of safety. What that begins looking like is, first, let's recognize what is a sheep, what is a goat. So we're going to go to Matthew 25. Now, I'm going to read through this, and I'm going to do my best to kind of explain it how I understand it. But what I'm going to ask you to do is, when we're done with this, is open up your Bibles, read it, take some time to understand what it is that makes the difference between a sheep and a goat, and just pray about it in your own life. Take an hour. Can't you sit with me for an hour, is what Jesus says. So let's take a look at it. Matthew 25. Now, in 24, the disciples asked Jesus, how will we know that the end times are here? And he says a lot, you know, he gives them a lot of descriptions of what that looks like, and then he goes into parables. These parables are very important because these are the difference between the sheep and the goats. And these parables will go through, and he says, you know, in the end times when I return, this is kind of what I expect to see. This is going to be the result if I see this, and this is going to be the result if I see that. But then at the end, he doesn't use parables anymore. He says very straightforward, here's exactly how it's going to look. Beginning in verse 31. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all his holy angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of his glory. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate them one from another, as a shepherd divides the sheep from the goats. And he will set the sheep on his right hand, but the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right hand, come, you blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundations of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me. Then the righteous will answer him, saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? When did we see you a stranger and take you in, or naked and clothe you? Or when did we see you sick or in prison and come to you? And the king will answer and say to them, assuredly I say to you, inasmuch as you did it to one of the least of these, my brethren, you did it to me. That's a sheep. Then he will also say to those on the left hand, depart from me, you cursed, into the everlasting fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me no drink. I was a stranger, and you did not take me in. Naked, and you did not clothe me. Sick and in prison, and you did not visit me. Then they will also answer him, saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty, or a stranger, or naked, or sick, or in prison, and did not minister to you? Then he will answer them, saying, assuredly I say to you, inasmuch as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me. And they will go away into everlasting punishment, but the righteous into everlasting life. through the sheep gate. It's really that simple. So I'm just going to ask you to take some time, dig through your Bible. Make sure you have a Bible. First of all, this is your sword. We're going to build with one hand and have a sword in the other. We battle against principalities. Make sure you have a sword. But dig through this. It's 25, starting verse 31 to the end, and just dig through it. Just kind of pray on it, meditate. I'm going to recommend an hour. Take an hour. Meditate on it. Pray on it. What does this mean to be a sheep? What does it mean to be a goat? Because Nehemiah, the very first thing they did was they built a way for the sheep to get in and out to safety. And that's what we're going to work on, is a way to get in and out. Because the enemy is not, once you start building, the enemy is coming. Be prepared, because there's going to be a point where we're going to have to build with one hand and a gun in the other. There's a point where we're going to have to do that. So be cautious. Be cautious. Take some time. Take an hour. What does it mean to be a sheep? Don't get fooled into thinking you're a goat. Believe you're a sheep. Know what it takes to be a sheep. Because what it takes is trusting enough in Jesus Christ to believe in His teaching and practice His teaching. Feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, taking care of the orphans and the widows. When you do it to the least of these, that's like doing it to Him. And I think that's an important message, because as we navigate the world, the things we do to people around the world, we're doing to Jesus, especially the least of these. Especially as you navigate the world and you come across the least of these, it's just like doing it to Jesus. So take some time, meditate on this. We're building a sheep gate. It's the first thing we're going to do. We're going to build a sheep gate. We're going to build a way for the sheep to clearly get through, to get in and out. And it's a gate designed specifically for sheep. It's not built for goats. It's not built for any other animal. It's specifically built for sheep. It's built for the remnant of Jesus Christ, to get in and out for safety. Love to hear your thoughts on all this. Take an hour with Jesus today. If you like this video, click like and subscribe. If you feel called to support this channel to Patreon, that link is below. But the most important part of this channel, we take prayer requests. Never hesitate to send that in. Thank you for watching this episode of God, Family, and Guns. And as always, love God, love your family, and love guns.